Let's talk about this next exercise. This is what we call the speaker-receiver interpretation. Go to page 5. So I'm in a client's office, and we're putting together training, leadership training for her organization. And we're putting the list together of who's going to attend. And one of her coworkers, who I know would really benefit from attending, isn't on the list. So I said, and I'll use fictitious names here, but I said, what about Mary? Did you want to include her in on the training? And she says, no, she doesn't deserve it. Okay, right? That's what came out of her mouth. No, she doesn't deserve it. And I said, oh, why not? And she tells me this story. She says, you know, I was made a fool of. Do you know that she sent out an email to, I'm trying to remember exactly how it went down. She sent out an email inviting the managers to a meeting, and I forgot what it was about, to discuss such and such. And she knew I needed to be at that meeting in order to effectively do my part on the project, and she didn't invite me. And if she's not going to invite me to her meetings, I'm not inviting her to my meetings. Okay, that's pretty much. I'm probably I'm emphasizing it just a little bit more in terms of the attitude. While she was keeping her attitude a little bit cleaner than that, that's what was going on in her head. Okay, so that was the situation. If you look down at this sheet for a minute, okay, we all have these interpretations of some kind. And so she had this interpretation that this coworker purposely left her out of the meeting and didn't invite her, right? And what happens is we have all kinds of events in our lives where we land with immediate interpretations as to why things are. You can see up here, these are ones we've heard from people. Of course, I've never really heard this from Ed. No. That jerk ran me off the road on purpose. Okay. But we've heard, right? We've heard, you know, he purposely copied me on this email so that I could see it. It was his passive-aggressive way. Or you know what? He made me stay late to work on this project. Or we just heard a few months ago, they're just out to embarrass us all. That's why they actually had us do the presentations, I think, which is tied to there. She knew I'd bomb the presentation. That's why she made me do it. She shut down her computer so that I wouldn't see what she was writing. I mean, people have interpretations all day long. Trust me, you guys are going to leave here today. You're going to be driving home, and you are going to have an interpretation on your way home about something. About why this driver did that. About why someone didn't want to go out for a beer with you. About whatever it is, we all have interpretations about why people say or do things. And so if you see this, right, all it takes is someone to say something. And you translate it. You translate it in some kind of way, you receive it, and you send it back. And sometimes we actually translate it wrong, or we interpret it wrong. Okay, so let's go back to the situation with Mary. Okay, so her situation is Mary intentionally left her out of the meeting, right? So I asked, we'll call her Jane. I said to Jane, so specifically, what was said and done? What did Mary specifically say or do? That's box number 2. Okay, in a minute, I'm actually going to have to practice. You're going to practice this exercise on each other. Okay, so what was actually said or done? Well, like I said, she says she sent out an email to everybody else, and she did not include me in the email. I said, is that your interpretation, or is that actually what happened, where you were not in the email? And she says, no, I was not in the email. I said, how did you find out about it? And she said, oh, I found out about it after the fact, when people told me they had this meeting and then I wasn't in it. And I said, okay, so how did it make you feel to find out after the fact that you were supposed to be in the meeting and Mary purposely did not send you the email and left you out? And she said, it made me feel disrespected. It made me feel she doesn't like me, and she came up with all these feelings. Now, I went back to, so how do you know? And this is where the reframer hack comes in. This is a reframer tool. So I gave her some before the possibilities, I said, so what's your action been since Mary purposely left you out of the meeting? What have your actions looked like? And she says, well, what do you mean, my actions? And I said, well, for an example, an action could be that you are not going to invite her to training now. Oh, she says, oh, yeah, but she did leave me off that email. And I said, are you sure? I said, are you sure? And she says, oh, I know so. And I said, how do you know that for sure? And she says, it's just the way she is. And she goes, I actually think she left me out because she knew that I would have a different opinion on a couple of things than she would, and she didn't want me to share my opinion. And that's why I think she did it. And I said, is that an interpretation or is that a fact? Well, no, it's an interpretation, she says. And I said, so as a result of you having these beliefs about the situation, you're deciding not to invite her to training. Yeah, why? Do you think maybe? And then she goes, do you think there would be another reason? And I said, I don't know. But maybe it's worth checking out before you land on a definite interpretation. And that's why you always want to look, you want the person to say, what's been the impact now of this relationship? Because if you decide not to invite her to training, what kind of an impact is that going to have for Mary, for the company, for the team? What kind of impact? And the new commitment actually comes in after you've reframed it, where she gets to see that maybe there's a different reason. Now, she actually, see the strategy at the bottom of the page? She actually went and committed to doing this with I'm forgetting my fictitious names mixed up, but Jane and Mary, right? So, and I have to be careful because they're standout names. Both of them are. Okay, so the approach and say. So this would be something like this. So Tim, let's say Tim, you're Mary or whatever, and I'm Jane, and I'm going to go check this out with you. I'm going to say, hey Tim, can I check something out with you? Sure. You know, the other day you held a meeting, and it was on the ABC, and you left me off the email, and I didn't come to the meeting. You know, my interpretation of that is that you didn't want me in the meeting, and that you thought maybe I would have a difference of opinion, and that's why you didn't invite me. It made me feel really disrespected. Is that what you meant? So she went, yeah, and that can be the case. So she went and did the checkout thing. I get a call from her. Oh my gosh. All right, you win. That's what she says to me. So I went to her, and you know what she said? Oh, I didn't even realize I left you out of the meeting. She accidentally forgot to include her on the email. And you don't believe it, right? What was your attitude score? I'm just wondering.
Allegedly.
Okay, so whether it is or it isn't, what you're trying to do here is just don't interpret things. There's so many misses. Think of a relationship that you have right now that has this happening with it. Right? Someone you know, and maybe it's from 10 years ago. Maybe it's current. But this is somebody that you have a conflict with. And think about, just look at this worksheet. Just think about it. When was the very first time you remember the conflict got started? What happened? Just think about that for a minute. When the conflict first started, what happened? And I'm talking about a personal or professional. What happened? And what was said and done by the other person, by you? What was said and done that caused that rift, that caused that conflict? And when that person said or did this thing, you're thinking, what was your interpretation as to why they did that? And Are you putting an interpretation in place of a fact? For everything that is said is a legitimate interpretation. The problem is that we view our interpretation as a reality. And we do this all the time. We have these I had the interpretation when my mom would not let me go to Scott's funeral, who was my little boyfriend in 8th grade, and he died, and my mom babysat him, and she would not let me go to the funeral. This is like my boyfriend, and she wouldn't let me go to the funeral. And I hung on to a belief that my mom doesn't care about me. Until I was mature enough to realize she was actually trying to protect me. But we do this, don't we? We hang on to these things, these beliefs that we have. And think about your situation. You know, when that person did whatever they did that caused this conflict, how did it make you feel? You know, tap into those feelings. And as a result of this conflict happening that you're thinking of, what's your action been? How have you retaliated? And retaliation can look like never talking to them again. I'm sure I didn't hit home with anybody on that one, right? Because look at the action. Number 5, with this insight, what would be the natural thing to do? Shoot them, right? Ignore them. And we do this all the time. And it's back to something you said earlier, Ed. We all have this high need to be right. So here's what we do. We believe that the reason they did this to us is because they have this problem, right? And so what we have to do in order to make ourselves feel better is we're going to keep our belief and story going about what we know to be true.
Can I ask a question?
Yes.
Is this more of damage control after the damage has already been done?
Yes.
As opposed to pre-planning a situation?
It's damage control.
Okay.
Good question. It's damage control. Now, it can be pre-planning, actually. It can be pre-planning when you catch yourself, right? Let me see my next slide. So when you're interpreting events, right, what was said, what was done. Okay, I've actually already gone over this. So back to this. When someone says or does something, you do have a choice. So this can be pre, right? When you take a look at, if I say...
Especially if you're trying to coach somebody that's coming into that situation.
Yeah.
They ask you on what you should do.
Yeah.
Things planned.
Right. If I say, hey, Beth, my grandmother has a necklace just like that. What's your interpretation? What could be your interpretation? Give me all the possibilities.
She has great taste.
That she has great taste. What else?
I'm not sure. Could be an antique. She's probably old too.
Right.
That's
That I think you're old.
Do you think I'm old? I have old woman taste.
Old women taste, all that kind of thing. Who knows how someone interprets anything we say? I'm sure that I have said something already in these 2 days that you interpreted as something that I didn't intend. But you interpreted it because I said it, right? It happens all the time with us that people interpret these things. But when you receive something that doesn't land well, or it just outright upsets you, you have a choice at that point. And your choice is to recognize that you may be putting a past relationship or belief about something that might be true, or your other choice is to go check it out. Hey Janet, you know earlier today when you told me that you thought my jewelry was just like your grandmother's, it reminded you of your grandmother, I kind of took that to mean that you think I dress old. Is that what you meant? See how I just used the 4 steps? Is that what you meant? And then I get to go, oh my gosh, no. In fact, I actually, the jewelry I'm talking about, I actually bought that for my grandmother. I got it at Brighton. It's really, really pretty, and now I get to explain it. But I don't get to explain it if you don't give me a chance because you decided not to interpret it. When that person cuts you off on your way home tonight, don't interpret it. Let it go. Just let it go. Easier said than done.
After I come over, then I'll let it go.
So what you want to do is don't let the resentment build up here, right? You want to Go to them with these 4 steps. Hey, can I check something out? When you said this, when you did that. Think about your situation right now. What if you did this? You're like, oh, I'm not touching that. No, but right? Think about it. Could there be a possible interpretation? Yeah.
I was thinking about these steps with that crazy driver. We could try and flag him.
Oh, right. I see. Yeah. Yeah.
Really find out.
You know how you made me feel when you cut me off? I just want to let you know that that's how I felt, but what's your motivation behind it?
And that comes after you pin them to the side and you get out with your gun. Yeah. Mhm.
How did you feel about that?
All right, I want you guys to practice this one actually. And we've even got this in a script format because I'm going to get you into teams of 3. Okay, so there's going to be the person